Okay, we're going to do section 2, Adam's fall. Okay. Just waking up this morning. This is the time when I have quiet in the house. So, what Nomista and Evangelista are talking about is that Adam did have the 10 Commandments. He didn't have them etched in stone because that didn't happen until Moses, but he had them on his heart. At some point, I said yesterday that I've only read this through once. I've read it through once. I've referenced it many times. So it's not like I just read it once. Oh, this is a great book. Let's all read it together. It's like this is a great reference for the gospel, the true gospel. And that's why I'm going through it with you. Okay, so Adam did have the 10 Commandments. It's just that they were on his heart. And he will show soon, I think. I don't have the book here, I just have the PDF, that in eating the forbidden fruit, Adam broke all 10 Commandments. Okay. Section 2, Adam's fall. Nomista, but it seems that Adam did not continue in that holy and happy estate. Evangelista, no indeed, for he disobeyed God's express command in eating the forbidden fruit, and so he became guilty of the breach of the covenant. Nomista, but sir, how could Adam, who had his understanding so sound and his will so free to choose good, be so disobedient to God's express command? Evangelista, though he and his will were both good, yet they were mutually good, so that he might stand or fall at his own election or choice. So, God made man to be able to sin, to be able to fall. Does that make sense? God gave us that ability to choose evil. The freest of wills. We have free. Man has free will, is born with free will, but it means different. It has a different meaning than what people today think. People think free will means that I can choose whatever I want. Let me choose whatever I want to do, good or evil, whatever, right or wrong. That gives me free. They think that the opposite of free will is automaton. Somebody who can't choose anything. They're just like a robot. They're just going through a designated path. God draws a chalk line on the ground and we follow it. Do. No, that's not what free will means in the ancient sense of the word. Our will is free in the sense that it can choose whatever it wants, but it is in bondage, so we do not have free will until we come to Christ. That doesn't mean that we're robots and we can only choose evil things, because people do, without Christ, do good things. Of course, those good things are ordained by God, but our wills are in prison. They are prisoners of the devil. And so we will choose evil. And even the things that we choose that are good are tainted by evil. We choose good things not because we love God and that they're the right things to do. Good for goodness sake. We do good because we're trying to find the angle that what can we get out of it? What can I get out of this situation? And sometimes it's unconscious and unconscious. setting up a hospital in Africa and saving all these lives. You're like, oh, he's a great philanthropist. Wow, he's helped so many people. He's a good person. But why did he do it? He didn't do it for God if he doesn't love God, if he doesn't believe in God. Why did he do it? He did it so that he could get the world's attention. Look what I did. And that the world would praise him, which is a form of worship. So, self-worship. He wanted to have the world worship him. And oh no, I don't feel that way. We do. We do feel that way. Now what God does through Christ is set us free, so that our wills are free. So we have free will now. But we can still choose evil because we have indwelling sin. When we die, we won't be able to choose evil. Unlike Adam. Adam can choose good or evil. God set it up because his intention was that we fall. This is a good thing, so that we can go through to the other side and be saved, which is a great thing. In heaven, we won't be able to choose evil, and it's not because God will then imprison us again in an only good prison, where we can only do good things, where our wills are imprisoned again. It's that they just won't even come to mind. It won't even occur to us to do evil. Because that's the way we should be. Okay, I'm going off on a tangent. But it's a good tangent. So that's what that means. Evangelista, though he and his will were both good, yet they were mutually good, so that he might stand or fall at his own election or choice. Namista, but why then did the Lord not create him immutable? Or why did he not overrule him in that action, so that he might not have eaten the forbidden fruit? That's a question a lot of us have. That's why this book is so great, because it asks, this is, an ancient book, not too ancient, the 1600s. I mean, that's, the time of the Puritans, who are writing colossal amounts of information. I mean, there's a thing called the Puritan hard drive, which you can get, I think you can get digitally now. You used to get it on CD back in the day. My mentor, Rick Daniels, has it all on CD. It's like this big box of CDs, because it's filled with PDFs and recordings and stuff like that. But now you can get it on they send you a drive that has everything on it, because you can fit more on a drive now. And it's just reading and reading and reading, and there's so much writing done in the 1600s on after the Reformation. The Reformation is Reformation happened in the 1500s, just to be general, and then all the Puritan writings happened in the 1600s, and then in the 1700s other stuff happened, but we won't talk about that. But there's just so much out there. But that's a common question. Why did not the Lord create him to not sin? Or why did he not overrule him in that action, so that he might not have eaten the forbidden fruit? Evangelista, the reason why the Lord did not create him immutable was because he would be obeyed out of judgment and free choice, and not by fatal necessity and absolute determination. Well, you heard that from C.S. Lewis, too. God doesn't want an automaton worshipping him. God doesn't want a robot that can only obey to obey him. He wants to be obeyed out of free choice, not by fatal necessity. And with this, let me tell you, it was not reasonable to restrain God on this point, to make man such that he would not or could not sin at all. It was not reasonable. Do you see that? For it was at God's choice to create man how he pleased. But why he did not uphold him with strength of steadfast continuance that rests hidden in God's secret counsel. So, we don't know why. When I said that's the thing that makes sense to us humans, is that, well, it must have been better this way. And so we think about it and we say, God must have needed us to fall. And I think C.S. Lewis said this. I don't know if he said this or not. But a fallen and redeemed humanity is preferable to God than a humanity that never fell. It's like Nietzsche, that which kills us, that which does not kill us makes us stronger. God allowed us to put ourselves through hell on earth so that we could become even more faithful servants in heaven. And that's but here's the bottom line. It's really God's knowledge. We can't know perfectly why he allowed Adam to fall. We can only speculate with our little human brains why he did. So what Evangelista is saying here is, that rests with God's secret counsel. Nevertheless, we may certainly conclude that Adam's state was such that it served to remove all excuse from him. For he received so much that of his own will he wrought his own destruction. Because this act of his was a willful transgression of a law, under the precepts of which he was most justly created, and under the malediction of which he was just as necessarily and righteously subject if he transgressed. For just as being God's creature meant he was subject to God's will, so being God's prisoner, he was as justly subject to his wrath. That was made more just by how much more precept was just, more the precept was just. I'll read that again. That was made more just by how much more the precept was just, the obedience easier, the transgression more reasonable, and the punishment more certain. You get that? I get it. Section 3. The sinfulness and misery of mankind by the fall. Nomista. And was Adam's sin and punishment imputed to his whole offspring? That's the problem. That's another question that lots of people have. Why do I have to be born in sin because of something Adam did a long time ago? Evangelista, yes indeed, for the apostle says in Romans 5:12, death passed upon all men, for all have sinned. We all die. We have the punishment. There's the evidence is there. The question should be why. He's asking, is it? Well, it's obvious. We all die, therefore we're all incurring the punishment. Now, do we all sin? Look around. It's easily proven that everyone sins. Death passed upon all men, for all have sinned, or in whom all have sinned. That is, in Adam. The very truth is that by his fall, Adam threw down our whole nature headlong into the same destruction as his own, and drowned his whole offspring in the same gulf of misery. And the reason for this is because by God's appointment he was not to stand or fall as a single person only, but as a common public person representing all mankind that would come from him. Therefore, just as all that happiness and all those gifts and endowments which were bestowed on him were not bestowed on him alone, but also on the whole nature of man. And just as the covenant which was made with him was made with the whole of mankind, even so, by breaking the covenant he lost all, for us as well for himself. For us as well for himself. Just as he received all for himself and us, so he lost all for himself and us. Notice no one ever complains about receiving the blessings that Adam received. The beauty of the earth, the most fantastic food that we have. There's so many flavors out there. There's so many good things that God has blessed us with on the earth. And none of us say, well, why do I get these blessings? Just because Adam got the blessings, why do I get the blessings? No one ever says that. Except for me right now. But we all are like, well, how come we get the curse when he gets the curse? It was his fault. Nomista. Then, sir, it seems that by Adam's breach of the covenant, all mankind was brought into a miserable condition. Evangelista. All mankind by the fall of Adam received a twofold damage. First, a deprivation of all original goodness. Secondly, a habitual natural proneness to all kinds of wickedness. For the image of God, after which they were created, was immediately blotted out. And in place of wisdom, righteousness, and true holiness came blindness, uncleanness, falsehood, and injustice. The very truth is that our whole nature was thereby corrupted, defiled, deformed, depraved, infected, made infirm, frail, malignant, full of venom, contrary to God. Yes, we were made enemies and rebels to him, so that, as Luther says, this is the title we have received from Adam. In this one thing we may glory, and in nothing else at all, namely, that every infant that is born into this world is wholly in the power of sin, death, Satan, hell, and everlasting damnation. Indeed, says Musculus, the whirlpool of man's sin in paradise is bottomless and unsearchable. That's pretty powerful stuff. Nomista. But, sir, I think it strange that so small an offense as eating the forbidden fruit seems to be should plunge the whole of mankind into such a gulf of misery. Evangelista. Though at first glance it seems to be a small offense, yet if we look more wistfully upon the matter, it will appear to be an exceedingly great offense, for intolerable injury was done to God by it, such as, first, his dominion and authority in his holy command was violated. Secondly, his justice, truth, and power in his most righteous threatenings were despised. Thirdly, his most pure and perfect image, in which man was created in righteousness and true holiness, was utterly defaced. Fourthly, his glory, which the creature should have brought to him by active serving, was lost and despoiled. No, indeed, how could there be a greater sin committed than when Adam, at that one clap, broke all 10 commandments? Okay, let me check my stream. Just real fast, check the stream. I'm live still. I hear that you're supposed to look and make sure that you're live every now and then so that you don't lose any of this valuable stuff. Nomista, he broke all 10 commandments, you say? Sir, I beseech you, show me how. Evangelista. Here we go. Here's your list. It's on the screen. 1. He chose another god for himself when he followed the devil. There you go. 2. He idolized and deified his own belly, as in the apostles' phrase, he made his belly his god. Read C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man. It's all about men without chests. We don't feed our wisdom. We feed our bellies. 3. He took the name of God in vain when he did not believe him. 4. He did not keep the rest and estate in which God set him. 5. He dishonored his Father who was in heaven, and therefore his days were not prolonged in the land which the Lord his God had given him. 6. He massacred himself and all his posterity. Think about it. The fact that sin is transferred down to all of humanity, it makes Adam a murderer of all humanity. Murdered our souls. Not to say all the people in humanity who have offed themselves, who've killed themselves because of sin. 7. He was a virgin from Eve, but in his eyes and mind he committed spiritual fornication. 8. He stole, like Achan did, what God had set aside as not to be meddled with, and his stealth is what troubles all Israel, the whole world. Stealing, yes. 9. He bore witness against God when he believed the witness of the devil above God. He accused God of bearing false witness. He bore false witness against God. 10. He coveted with an evil covetousness, like Ammon, which cost him his life and all his progeny. So I'm not going to get into he was a virgin from Eve, because it may be the case, because there are those who say that Adam did the sin on the first day that they were around. He cataloging the animals, named all the animals. God said he needed a helpmeet, created Eve from his rib, and then we assume that time passes where they're just frolicking and making love and having just a grand old time, but that's not necessarily the case. Maybe the fall of man came soon after in time. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that. Now, whoever considers what a nest of evils were committed here in one blow must see with Musculus. We'll have to look up Musculus. Apparently he is a big reference for this book. The footnotes should have, the endnotes should have reference to what book he's talking about. Must see with Musculus that our case is such that we are compelled to commend the justice of God in every way, and to condemn the sin of our first parents. Concerning all mankind we must say, as the prophet Hosea said concerning Israel, Israel, you have destroyed yourself. Hosea 13:9. Section 4. No recovery by the law or covenant of works. Now we're going to get back to that threefold law, and we're going to show that the covenant of works does not save us. I'm still running. All right. Nomista. But sir, would it not have been possible for Adam to help himself and his posterity out of his misery by renewing the same covenant with God and keeping it afterwards? Can I get a mulligan? Can I get a do-over? Come on, let me do over. I'll do it right this time. A lot of people think that's what Christianity is. Second chance. Hey, come to Christ. God gives you a do-over. You can save yourself again by not sinning. And then, of course, when you sin immediately, by thought, word, and deed, suddenly you're like, well, there goes my second chance. Walking away. God, this isn't a mulligan religion. Okay. By renewing the same covenant with God and keeping it afterwards. Evangelista, no, by no means, for the covenant of works was a covenant in no way capable of renovation. Once he had broken it, he was gone forever, because it was a covenant between two friends. But now, fallen man had become an enemy, and besides, it was an impossible thing for Adam to have performed the conditions now, which the justice of God necessarily required at his hands, for he had now become liable for the payment of a double debt, namely, the debt of satisfaction for his sin committed in time past, and the debt of perfect and perpetual obedience for the time to come, and he was utterly unable to pay either of them. Nomista, why was he unable to pay the debt of satisfaction for his sin committed in the past? Evangelista, because his sin in eating the forbidden fruit, which is the sin I mean, was committed against an infinite and eternal God, and therefore it merited an infinite and eternal satisfaction, either some temporal punishment equivalent to eternal damnation, or eternal damnation itself. Now Adam was a finite creature, therefore between finite and infinite there could be no proportion. So it was impossible for Adam to make satisfaction by any temporal punishment. And if he had undertaken to satisfy by an eternal punishment, he would always be satisfying and never have satisfied it, as is the case of the damned in hell. This perfectly summarizes our condition and why we can't save ourselves. Notice it merited, his sin in eating forbidden fruit was committed against an infinite and eternal God, and therefore it merited an infinite and eternal satisfaction. I heard this from Todd Friel in his evangelistic arguments that he makes with unbelievers on the streets. And it's really, well, if I sin against, if I lie, let's take a lie. If I lie against my daughter, one of my daughters, nothing happens to me because I'm an adult and my daughter can scream and wail and say, you liar, and all that, and it's like, whatever. Not that I would ever do that. But, if I lied against my wife, if I lied to my wife, I'd be sleeping on the couch. If I lied to my employer, I could get fired. If I lied to the government, that's called treason. And I could get put in jail for a long, long time. It used to be execution was the punishment for treason. Now it's not. Look at the news. They're treasoning all over the place. If I lie to God, what's the punishment? Notice that the punishment changed with each situation. Why did it change? It got worse and worse. Losing the job, getting thrown in jail for treason. Worse. Why? Because the person I sinned against changed. So, you sin against an infinite and eternal God. It therefore merits an infinite and eternal satisfaction. Either some temporal punishment equivalent to eternal damnation. What is that? That's what Christ is going to undergo. A temporal punishment equivalent to eternal damnation, or eternal damnation itself. Adam was a finite creature. Therefore, between finite and infinite, there could be no proportion. So it's impossible for Adam to make satisfaction by any temporal punishment. It's impossible for any of us to make satisfaction by any temporal punishment. Even for ourselves, much less for another person. And if he had undertaken to satisfy any eternal punishment, he would always be satisfying and never have satisfied. That's why even eternal punishment is not enough. That's why you're punished eternally. So that's why it's eternal. Not okay. Purgatory. You've spent 10 years in purgatory. You've now paid off the sin debt to God. No. He's an infinite and eternal God. The penalty is infinite and eternal. Damnation is infinite and eternal because you can't pay off the debt. That's a predicament, but that's the way reality is. And we can't pay it off here, temporally, because we're not eternal creatures. We are finite creatures. Jesus is not an eternal creature either. He's an eternal God. He is not a creature. That's Arianism. And so, Jesus is the only person, because he's eternal God, that can pay off temporally the punishment equivalent to eternal damnation. Very awesome encapsulation there of the first part of the gospel. Well, the first part being sin. The second part being there's no way we can pay it off. There are many parts of the gospel. That's kind of a logical flow. Okay. Nomista. And why was he unable to pay the debt of perfect and perpetual obedience for the time to come? Remember, we get not satisfaction for his sin in the past. Now, the question is, what about obedience? Why was he unable to pay the debt for perfect and perpetual obedience for the time to come? Why can't he get a mulligan? Why can't he get a do-over? Because his former power to obey was utterly impaired by his fall. For by his fall his understanding was both enfeebled and drowned in darkness, and his will was made perverse and utterly deprived of all power to will good, and his affections were set completely out of order. All things belonging to the blessed life of the soul were extinguished, both in him and us. Think of how many people don't feed their soul. They don't even think they have a soul. Well, the truth is, they are a soul. So that he had become impotent, indeed dead, and therefore he was not able to stand in the lowest terms to perform the meanest condition. The truth is, our father Adam, in falling from God, so dashed himself and all of us to pieces by it, that there was no whole part left either in him or in us that was fit to base such a covenant upon. And the apostle witnesses this both when he says we were of no strength, Romans 5:6, and the law was made weak because of the flesh, Romans 8:3. Nomista. But sir, might not the Lord have pardoned Adam's sin without satisfaction? Evangelista. Yeah, why doesn't God just make it go away? What a jerk. Why didn't he just say, I forgive you? Evangelista. Oh no. For justice is essential in God, and it is a righteous thing with God that every transgression receives a just recompense. and if recompense is just, then it is unjust to pardon sin without satisfaction. Though the Lord had pardoned and forgiven his former transgression, and thus restored Adam to his former condition of amity and friendship. So if he had done that, that's the way they worded it back then. So if he had done that, yet having no power to keep the law perfectly, Adam could not have continued in it. He would have just sinned again. Even if he had done it, Adam's condition would have caused him to sin almost immediately. Nomista. And is it also impossible for any of his posterity to keep the law perfectly? Evangelista. Yes, it is impossible for any mere man in this life to keep it perfectly. Indeed, even if he is a regenerate man, for the law, even if he's a Christian, we have indwelling sin in our hearts, and so we stumble and fall. We can't keep it perfectly. For the law requires from man that he love the Lord with all his heart, soul, and might, strength. And the holiest man alive is but flesh as well as spirit, in all the parts and faculties of his soul. Therefore he cannot love the Lord perfectly. Yes, and the law forbids all habitual concupiscence, not only saying, you shall not consent to lust, but you shall not lust. It not only commands the binding of lust, but it also forbids the existence of lust. And who can say in this case, my heart is clean? That's kind of mirroring what Christ said on the Sermon on the Mount, in the Sermon on the Mount. It's not that don't do it. That's the problem the Pharisees had. We were not doing sin, which was true. They were keeping themselves outwardly, like the outside of the cup, clean. But Jesus said, the inside of the cup is filthy. Lust should not be in your heart either. Murder should not be in your heart either. Does that make sense? You murder someone. You physically kill that person. But many of us can say, I've never murdered anyone. But Christ says, if you've been angry at someone, if you've called someone a name, you're murdering them in your heart. You're breaking the sixth commandment. Jews, even today, that don't believe that Christ is the Messiah, they believe that you physically try to keep the law, and that the idea that your thoughts and words count too is not, it's reprehensible to them. They don't believe that. That's why when Jesus came, he said, I'm not going to come to abolish the law. I came to tighten the law, to make it clear to you that there's no way you can do this on your own. You need to have a holy sacrifice on your behalf, or there's no out of this. Eternal damnation is the destination for everyone. Antinomista, new character talks. And when I get to the end of this passage, I'm going to stop. Antinomista. Then, nomista, take notice, I ask, that as it was altogether impossible for Adam to return into that holy and happy estate in which he was created by the same way that he left it, so it is impossible for any of his posterity. Therefore I remember one says very wittingly, the law was Adam's lease when God made him a tenant of Eden, and when he did not keep the conditions of that bond, he forfeited all for himself and us. God read a lecture of the law to him before he fell, to be a hedge to him to keep him in paradise. But when Adam would not keep within its compass, this law has now become like the flaming sword at Eden's gate to keep him and his posterity out. So here's Antinomista agreeing with Evangelista. And we'll find that Antinomista is not, he's right about the covenant of works, but he's wrong about the covenant of Christ. Nomista is wrong about the covenant of works. I don't know how, he didn't even know that there was a covenant of Christ. And none of them knew it was a covenant of Christ until Evangelista points to it. Okay, the next part will be section 5, and that will be part 4 of our talk. And so, let's stop streaming.